Hey there. Well, I was given the job to help parents with instructional tips for teaching reading. I have to say this is a little uncomfortable for me because A, I work with 5, 6, and 7 year olds, and B, I don't want to come across as condescending teaching reading tips to people who read with their kids and probably do a fantastic job. Um, but I'm just going to go ahead and talk about some of the strategies that we suggest as teachers. You can take them or leave them. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to email me or send me a message in another way, like on Class Dojo or on the Google Classroom. So we're going to start with this chart over here. It's tips for teaching kids reading. And I want to say the number one tip, and I know that you can relate to this, is patience. And this is a really hard one because as a parent myself, I know that when you're working with your own kids, they tend to have less patience for you than they would their teacher. So I know that this is a difficulty, and I've had a lot of parents talk to me about getting frustrated when reading with kids. Um, but it's super, super important if we can practice patience when we're reading with kids. If we can have, I put the word zen because when I'm reading with my daughter, I'm doing the whole Seinfeld serenity now thing. Um, but if we can have patience, we can really increase their ability to read with fluency, but also, and more importantly, um, promote a love of reading because our anxiety equals their anxiety. And I know you've experienced this. It doesn't make it any easier to try and show that patience and try and be calm. But if we can do it and we can make reading a less anxious experience for them, then they're more likely to grab onto it and want to do it in their free time. And I think that the number one thing that we have to remind ourselves when we're teaching kids to read is that there's no stopwatch. There's nothing that says something has to be done in a certain time. And to be honest, there's really nothing that tells us that they have to get to a certain point. The more important factor is that they read for the entire duration of when you're asking them to read. It doesn't matter how far they get. So, for example, in first grade, the recommended reading time is 20 minutes per session. And if they can do 20 minutes and they only get through half a page, well, then they only get through half a page. But the number one thing is that you're talking to them about the book, you're making it enjoyable, and you're keeping anxiety down. Now, there's some ways to make sure that you do that by focusing on strategies as opposed to the reading itself. And the first one I want to talk about is point out practice tools. Okay, and we have a number of them we've been working on all year. We've been working on sight words, we've been working on sound spellings. And for those of you who don't know, both of those are up on the teacher resources as printables if you want to work on those. Also, at least to this date, I have put the sight words up on a video under teacher resources so that kids can go through the video either with sound or without sound to practice their sight words. But most of language is made up of sight words, sound spellings. They're very common in our reading language. And if the kids have those down, they're going to be much more likely to reduce their stress and be able to focus their energy on the words that are actually more decodable. Because sight words usually have unusual spellings, and then sound spellings are tools to combine sounds to make new sounds that the kids aren't that they don't have yet. Um, Wanted to talk a little bit about gentle support. Gentle support is when you're helping them, you're helping them, remind them of their sight words and their sound spellings as they go. So you give them a chance to read a little bit, you give them a chance to try out the word, and then you might just point out a couple of letters that are a sound spelling to remind them, oh, look over here. Remember to group those together. Or you might remind a student that a word they're having difficulty is with a sight word, so think about your sight word list. Okay, so for number 4, help them break down words. And there's a number of ways that we can break down words. The first and most obvious way is by sound or by sound spelling. It's the way that we learn to read. It's when you're doing cat, it's reminding them that they can use their sounds to go k, at. Or if it was catch, then you would just make sure you use the sound spelling at the end of that. But those are for the simplest words, for the easiest words. There's ways to break down more difficult words. And one of the things that we can use is the ability to break down compound words by their part. So for example, if we look over here at number 3, we see a compound word, cupcake, right? And so if we teach the kids to see the first part, we can actually cover up the second part. They read it, read the second part, uncover the whole thing, and they can read the whole word. So you do that by compound word. You can also do that by syllable. Syllables also help with spelling a little bit because there's some rules about spelling with syllables. Open syllables means a vowel that is at the end of a syllable and it makes the vowel say its name. So using syllables to break down words can be very helpful too. So if I come over here, let's see, I believe I had an open syllable word, didn't I? Let's see, maybe I did not. I don't have an open syllable word. Well, an open syllable word would be like enough, right? Where the E is saying its name. And if you break down the syllables by counting the syllables and show them where the syllables break, you can do that. But also syllables, breaking down syllables help you with extra long words. For example, this word right here, interesting, right? That's a lot for a kid. And you probably notice your kids when they're reading a long word like that, they'll see the first sound and they'll just guess because it stresses them out to see the whole word. You can get tools like a word blocker or, let's see, I think I have that right here, a blocker, right? You can use a popsicle stick. You can use a piece of cardboard. You can use a piece of paper. You can even just use your hand and block out the part of the word that you don't want them to focus on just yet. Let them chunk it into meaningful little sections. So for example, if I was reading interesting with a student, I would actually physically block out everything after the IN, and I'd have them read that. I might even remind them that that's a sight word. So they would say in, ter, est, interest, ending sound, ing. So blocking off parts of the word, it doesn't make the word any easier in the sense that it doesn't make it easier to blend the whole thing, but it will allow children to see the parts of it and break it down, and then they'll start to break down words on their own as they read. Let's see. Questioning. Questioning is really important for reading, especially in first grade, because we're trying to develop a love of reading. And when you're questioning, you're engaging children in the book or the story or the informational text in a way that asks them to really think about it, process it, and then give a response. So when we're questioning, we're really helping students understand, and when they're understanding, we're creating interest. We want to encourage that engagement because we want reading to be about the story or about the learning and not about the actual process. That's what's going to encourage children to really enjoy reading. So I'm just going to go through some of these sample words here just to show how I might help a student read these. So the first one, the thing I would do is I would point out a few sound spellings. If they got to this word and they were confused, I would point to the OU and remind them that it was from the ouch card and ask them what it said. I would also remind them that there's a CH here working together from the choo-choo card. So that one is going to say ch. And I'm going to remind them that there is a Y at the end, and Y at the end can say two sounds. It can say E or I. And then we would blend it together. We would go g, ow, grouch, grouch, Y at the end, E or I. Would it be grouchy or grouch I? Give them those kind of hints. This one is a straightforward one. You can just do it sound by sound. Und. Sound spelling from the otter card, under. We talked about this one a little bit. This is a compound word. You can point out that there's two words that they might already recognize and put them together. Again, we can use syllables to break down a long word like interesting, and we can cover it up with our blocker. Here's another compound word. But another thing about this word here is that it has some sound spellings in it that we're going to remind them. OA in our class is from the boat card. Oh, and here is the open syllable that I was talking about earlier. If we are using our syllables to help us break down a word, I might say that this word has an open syllable at the beginning, right? So we know that O is going to say its name because it's at the end of a syllable. So we would say O, overboard. Big long word, break it down by the sounds, break it down by the syllables, and it's actually approachable. And this word right here, I'm going to remind the students that C can make another sound. It can make the soft C sound, which is the same sound as S. It can say S, but it only does that if the letter after it makes an I or an E sound. Because the Y is a Y at the end, so it's making an E sound in spicy, that E is going to cause the C to be soft, and so those two are working together. Now, this is really complicated, and we don't usually think about these things while we're reading, but making these connections will help kids as they're breaking down these words, and then eventually they'll start to put these words away in their little word banks in their brains, and we won't have to do these things. Also, there's an open syllable I here. I is at the end of the syllable. I decided I was going to put a sentence here just so we could talk about if a student was reading. And I'm just going to kind of go over the sentence and talk about where students might get a little bit blocked. So obviously they're going to be able to do the sight words. I'm going to ask them to find the sight words as they read. And then we get to a word that's going to be difficult for them. Again, I'm going to look at this word and find the sounds that work together to make another sound. So I'm going to give you a second to think about the words as far as a first grader would think about them. I want you to think about the sounds that might be difficult for a student. And if you notice the CE, you're correct. That E is making C say the soft sound. So you would want to point that out if the student got stuck on that word. Easily decodable word, probably not going to be an issue. Again, here's another word that might be a little bit challenging because it's a little bit longer. This would be an excellent word to use a blocker and block out parts of the word so that they can break it down. So it would be exploring. Sight word easily decodable, sight word easily decodable. Here, this has the OR sound. They work together to say or. Kids want to say So I would probably point out that grouping, and then we would decode that. Sight word. Again, a longer word. This one we could use the compound strategy. We could say, well, let's look at this. Ever. Last with the ending ing. Everlasting. So breaking it down into easier chunks. And then this one is one that, of course, we get the kids that go, ig, t, right? Because they say all those sounds. So again, I'm going to remind them about that chunk right there, that the IGH in the class, that's our night card, that says long I, and then help them blend the word. Every single time we make a connection for them, a way for them to route that information, that word is going to be a little bit harder or a little bit easier the next time. Also, I wanted to go back and talk about, where was I? Right there. When I say give them time to try, this is all the way back at the beginning. This is really important for this reason, right? We want to give them time to try and remember what sound that makes before we give it to them. And the reason is that every time that they have to route to that information, they have to fire off those synapses in their brain and navigate to that IGH spelling that they learned in class. That creates a neural pathway. It helps them get to the information more quickly the next time. So every time we give them enough time, and sometimes it'll be really frustrating because it might take, they're really thinking about it, but they're not frustrated, so I'm just going to sit back and let them try and get there. If it takes them 20 seconds, but they finally get that IGH says the I sound, then the next time, because they have created a pathway to that sound, it might only take them 15 seconds. And then that map is becoming more clear. The lines, the roads are becoming thicker and easier to see. And before long, they're just going to be saying that sound with automaticity. So I hope this video has been at least somewhat helpful for you. And I know a lot of you are probably already just like rocking out reading with your kids. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact me on my Google Classroom or send me an email. Try and enjoy reading with your kids. I'm still working on that Zen myself with my daughter. So thank you very much. See you next time.